November 18, 1953, a remote cabin at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. 12 men, CIA scientists and Army biochemists, sat down to drinks after dinner. Someone produced a bottle of Cointreau. Glasses were poured. 20 minutes later, it became clear that several men had been drugged. One of them, a senior Army scientist named Frank Olson, reacted more severely than the rest. He became agitated, withdrawn, deeply disturbed. 10 days later, at 2:30 in the morning, he plunged through the window of his room on the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel in New York City. He was dead before help arrived. His colleague, seated on the toilet in their shared room when police entered, made a single phone call. The person on the other end said, "Well, that's too bad," and hung up. The official verdict: suicide. The hidden truth: Frank Olson had been secretly dosed with LSD by the CIA, and that was just the beginning. To understand what the CIA was doing in that cabin in Maryland, you have to understand what America believed it was facing in 1953. The Korean War was ending, and something had happened to the American POWs returning from Chinese and Soviet captivity that the Pentagon could not explain. Some had confessed to war crimes they didn't commit. Some had renounced their country publicly and refused to come home. Some returned looking like different people, reciting communist propaganda with a conviction that seemed impossible to fake. The American press had a word for it: brainwashing, and the CIA wasn't sure it was just a word. On April 10, 1953, 3 days after publicly decrying Soviet brain perversion techniques as nefarious and abhorrent, CIA Director Allen Dulles quietly signed the authorization for the most secret program in the agency's history, Project MK-Ultra, a top-secret program for the covert use of biological and chemical materials, an American mind control program, and the man put in charge of it would become one of the most dangerous scientists the United States government ever employed. His name was Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist, a mild-mannered man with a clubfoot and a stutter. He kept goats on his Virginia farm. He folk-danced on weekends. He was also the head of the CIA's chemical division, and the architect of a program that would experiment on thousands of American citizens without their knowledge or consent over the next decade. Gottlieb's mandate was simple and terrifying: find a way to control the human mind, not persuade, not interrogate, control. The stated goal was to develop a perfect truth serum for use on Soviet spies, but the real ambition went further. CIA documents, those that survived, describe experiments aimed at creating, quote, a Manchurian candidate-style subject, an agent who could be programmed, controlled, and directed against their will. To find out if it was possible, Gottlieb needed test subjects, and he wasn't particularly concerned about consent. MK-Ultra was not one program. It was over 150 sub-projects running simultaneously across universities, hospitals, military installations, and private research institutions across the United States and Canada. Most of the scientists conducting the research didn't know who was funding them. The CIA operated through front organizations, fake foundations with legitimate-sounding names, that provided grants to academic researchers. The researchers believed they were studying psychology or pharmacology for conventional scientific purposes. They were actually running experiments for an intelligence agency that needed to know how to break a human being. The tools were everything you'd expect and worse: LSD, mescaline, barbiturates, electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, radiation, extreme isolation. Subjects placed in sealed rooms for days without food or contact. Some tested alone, some tested in combinations that nobody had ever tried on a human before. And the test subjects, prisoners, mental patients, drug addicts, soldiers, hospital patients, frequently had no idea what was happening to them. But Gottlieb wanted more than controlled laboratory conditions. He wanted real-world data. That's where Operation Midnight Climax came in, and the name tells you almost everything. In 1954, Gottlieb established a network of CIA safe houses in San Francisco and New York, apartments furnished and fitted with one-way mirrors and recording equipment. The CIA hired prostitutes and paid them to bring men back to these apartments. The men were served drinks. The drinks were laced with LSD, and CIA operatives watched from behind the mirrors, taking notes. The operation ran for years. The agents monitoring it reportedly consumed cocktails and watched. One operative later described it as, quote, too much fun to give up. The subjects had no idea they were test subjects. They were civilians, ordinary Americans walking into an apartment expecting a private evening. And instead, they were dosed with an experimental hallucinogen by their own government, while federal agents took notes through a hidden window. The CIA called this research. It ran until 1965, but Operation Midnight Climax was almost gentle compared to what was happening in Canada. Gottlieb had recruited a Scottish psychiatrist named Donald Ewan Cameron, one of the most respected figures in international psychiatry. Cameron was the founding president of the World Psychiatric Association. He had been a member of the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal, sitting in judgment of Nazi doctors who had conducted experiments on prisoners. He then took CIA funding and did something not entirely unlike what those doctors had done. Cameron's theory was that mental illness could be cured by erasing the patient's existing memories and reprogramming the psyche from scratch. He called it psychic driving. At his clinic at McGill University in Montreal, CIA-funded patients were placed into medically induced sleep for weeks, sometimes months, at a time. They were given massive doses of LSD and other drugs. They received up to 60 electroshock treatment, far beyond any medically accepted threshold. Recordings of repeated statements were played to them on a loop, day and night, through speakers under their pillows, designed to implant new behavioral patterns into minds that had been deliberately reduced to a blank state. When they woke up, some of them didn't know who they were. Some couldn't recognize their own family, some never fully recovered. They'd come to Cameron seeking treatment for depression and anxiety. They left as broken human beings, robbed of years of memory, unable to function, their personalities altered beyond recognition. Cameron died in 1967. His patients spent decades pursuing legal action against the CIA. Some eventually received settlements. None of them received their memories back. Back in the United States, the program was already beginning to collapse under its own weight. In 1963, a decade into MKUltra, the CIA's own Inspector General conducted an internal review. The findings were damning. The Inspector General John Ehrman reported that unwitting testing on American citizens was not only illegal, but ethically indefensible. He pushed to shut it down. Gottlieb and CIA. Director Richard Helms pushed back, arguing the research was too valuable to abandon. Ehrman won. Unwitting testing on Americans was officially suspended, but MKUltra didn't end. It evolved. And then, in 1973, the entire edifice began to crack. Watergate had consumed Washington. Congressional investigators were looking at the CIA, and Richard Helms, about to leave his position as CIA director, made a decision that would define the program's legacy. He ordered all MKUltra files destroyed, not archived, not classified, destroyed. Thousands of documents shredded, gone. Present practice, Promu, an internal document had noted years earlier, is to maintain no records. That sentence, written inside one of the most powerful intelligence agencies on Earth, tells you everything about how seriously the CIA took the legal and moral boundaries of what it was doing. The funny part, if anything about this can be called funny, is that Helms failed, because MKUltra files had also been sent to the CIA's Retirement Records Center outside Washington as budget and financial documents, filing, bookkeeping, the mundane administrative paper trail of a secret program, and that paperwork survived. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered 20,000 documents that Helms's destruction order had missed, 20,000 pages. The Senate held hearings. The public learned what their government had been doing to them for 20 years. Frank Olson's name finally appeared in print, and his family, who had been told for 22 years that he had simply jumped from a hotel window, finally learned the truth. They were summoned to the Oval Office. President Gerald Ford personally apologized. The government paid the family $750,000 to settle a wrongful death claim, and then they asked the family to sign a release promising never to sue the United States government again. The Olson family signed. But Frank Olson's son Eric spent the rest of his life believing his father had not jumped. In 1994, 41 years after his father's death, Eric had the body exhumed. A second autopsy found evidence of blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with having been struck before going through the window. The New York District Attorney investigated. He concluded there was compelling evidence that Frank Olson had been murdered. No charges were ever filed. The case remains officially open. Sidney Gottlieb testified before the Church Committee in October of 1975. He did so under a pseudonym. He admitted the program had produced, in his words, as many failures as successes. He admitted the LSD experiments had been too unpredictable. He admitted that the results, generally speaking, had not produced the breakthroughs anyone had hoped for. After 2 decades of illegal experimentation, after thousands of unwitting subjects, after destroyed memories and broken lives, and at least one death that may have been a murder, the best the man who ran the program could say was, it didn't really work. Gottlieb retired to his farm in Virginia. He tended his goats, he built furniture, he traveled to India, and worked for a time in a medical mission. He died in 1999. He was never charged with a crime. The CIA's official position is that MKUltra ended in the 1960s. The documents that survive tell a more complicated story. In 2024, the National Security Archive and ProQuest published a new scholarly collection of over 1,200 MKUltra-related documents. Among them, records showing that the program's ambitions extended well before 1953 and well after 1964. That the research network, universities, hospitals, private foundations, had been woven so deeply into American academic and medical institutions that pulling it out completely was never straightforward. And the question the program was originally designed to answer, into whether the human mind can be externally controlled, has not gone away. The technology has changed. Brain-computer interfaces, precision pharmacology, AI-driven behavioral modeling, the capability to monitor influence and potentially manipulate human cognition has advanced far beyond anything Gottlieb's chemists could have imagined. The ethical frameworks governing that research have not kept pace. In the cabin at Deep Creek Lake in November 1953, 12 men sat down to drinks. One of them died 10 days later. The government called it suicide for 22 years. Investigators called it possibly murder. The man who ordered the drug hidden in his drink was never charged, and the program that drink was part of, designed to crack the human mind open and rewire what it found inside, ran for at least 20 years, touched at least 150 sub-projects, and left a trail of people whose names and stories are still being reconstructed from documents that were never supposed to survive. The Cold War ended. The files were supposed to be destroyed, but 20,000 pages made it through, and what they describe is not a foreign enemy's program, it's ours. If you want more stories about what your government did in the dark during the Cold War, stories that are documented, declassified, and more disturbing than any fiction, subscribe. New episodes every week, and drop it in the comments. Did MK Ultra actually work? Or was it, as Gottlieb admitted, mostly failure dressed up as necessity? We read every single one. See you in the next one.